I think you'd be hard-pressed to find an adult or a kid who's not at least a little familiar with the iconic Transformers franchise. This group of transforming alien robots has been a part of people's childhoods across the globe and across generations. No matter how much people criticize Michael Bay, I feel like a huge amount of credit does go to him for reigniting interest in the franchise for newer generations, but there was also Beast Wars, which did the same for another group of people who grew up in the late 90s. The point I'm trying to make here is that the legacy of the Transformers franchise is long and storied, which explains its status as one of the biggest toy, animation, comic, and movie franchises in the world. However, today, I'm here to explore the series that arguably jump-started it all way back in 1984. That's right, we're talking about the original 1984 G1 Transformers animated TV series. In this video, we'll be exploring its origins, what made it so great, its slow decline, its controversial ending, and the legacy that it left behind. So, without any further ado, join us on our time machine as we travel back down memory lane to explore how the original Transformers ended. It's going to be a good one, so let's get into it. How did the original Transformers show begin? To truly understand the manner in which the original Transformers animated TV show ended, we think it's important to first get some context about its beginning. Following the success of the G.I. Joe animated show in toys, which involved Hasbro working with Marvel and Griffin Bacall's Sunbow Productions, Hasbro was eager to replicate that success once more. To this end, Hasbro approached Marvel and Sunbow to launch another comic series and animated show based on its line of robot toys, which were set to be called the Transformers. This series would feature the story of two factions of sentient alien robots capable of transforming their bodies, stuck in an eternal battle against each other. As you probably already know, Hasbro struck gold once again with its partners and their winning formula. Transformers grew into one of the biggest franchises of all time, and we think it cannot be overstated just how much of a role the TV series had to play in that. The original Transformers animated series aired for 4 seasons, along with a theatrical film, after which the American cartoon finally came to an end in 1987. The series ran from 1984 to 87 and is generally counted as having 98 episodes. By the time the series ended, we think it's fair to say that from the moment the 3-part miniseries More Than Meets the Eye first aired, fans already knew they had an absolute banger on their hands. The people behind the television series were also helped greatly by the fact that Bob Budiansky had already fleshed out many of the names, character biographies, and lore for the comics and Hasbro character material. Budiansky later explained that he came up with many names and character profiles for the early Transformers universe. Even the name Megatron came from Budiansky, who said he had to fight for it after Hasbro initially felt it sounded too scary. Good call, Bob. Of course, Megatron was designed to be intimidating, and Budiansky pushed back when Hasbro objected to the name because, in simple terms, he was the leader of the bad guys and was supposed to sound frightening. In our opinion, he's the reason the animated series had such a solid base to launch from, and he saved the writers the hassle of creating every preliminary backstory from scratch. Instead, they could expand on Budiansky's ideas, even though the stories in the comics and the original show would later diverge significantly from each other. Together, the original Transformers TV series and the Marvel Comics created a legacy that continues to stand the test of time more than 40 years later.
Out of the way, Hot Rod!
Earthquake, the 1986 movie. Before we go any further, I have to give you a trigger warning because we're going to bear witness to just how out of touch corporate decision makers could be even back in the day. And honestly, that's one of the things that upsets me the most. The Transformers, the movie, came out in the summer of 1986, essentially bridging the gap between the end of the second season and the beginning of the third. Flint Dill, who had worked as a story consultant on the film and later as story editor on the series, had gone on record saying that the production team and the people at Hasbro did not fully realize that Optimus Prime had become such a cultural icon by that time. Dill would later fully admit this mistake directly when he said, and I quote, "We didn't know he was an icon." This oversight led to a pretty surprising shock for fans back in the day because the film outright killed Optimus Prime. And not just that, it also took out other fan-favorite characters like Ironhide, Ratchet, Prowl, Brawn, and Starscream, just to name a few. It was a mass culling, especially considering what Dill would later reveal. You have to remember that the comics and the TV shows that came out during this era were primarily created to promote and sell toys. They weren't there purely to entertain us in the way many shows today are built around long-term storytelling. According to Dill, the basic business logic was that they were replacing the old product line with new products. That's why so many older characters were removed, including Optimus Prime himself. After doing some digging, we found out that this was not entirely out of character for toy companies at the time. Older products were often retired, so newer ones could be pushed to target audiences. Unfortunately for them, the folks at Hasbro didn't realize just how big of a goldmine they had struck, and they underestimated the attachment their younger audiences had formed with these characters. Ron Friedman, the film's screenwriter, put it even more clearly when he said that Hasbro didn't recognize that Optimus Prime was the heartbeat of the Autobots. The movie introduced several new characters, including Hot Rod, who was supposed to become the new leader of the Autobots under the name Rodimus Prime. But that never fully took off in the way Hasbro hoped because of the massive backlash from fans. Honestly, my hot take is that the film had a pretty strong story for what it was. We got Megatron reborn as Galvatron, we got the planet-eating threat of Unicron, and the animation itself was pretty damn spiffy for the time. Sadly, none of that could make up for the trauma of watching Optimus Prime die. Over the years, stories have circulated about children crying in theaters, fans being furious over the decision. That emotional reaction makes sense because Optimus was always more than just the leader of the Autobots. He was the moral anchor of the entire franchise. And you know what the film does to him? It kills him within the first act. I mean, talk about shooting yourself in the foot. Also, considering that the film was expensive compared with the regular TV episodes and it underperformed at the box office, it hit the franchise hard. On the bright side, it fundamentally altered the course of Transformers history because it became clear that Optimus was never going to be replaced easily. Eventually, he was brought back to life in the animated series, but by that point, the damage had been done.
Optimus. I've done it! Optimus Prime!
Season 3 and the slow decline. By the time the third season of the Transformers animated series rolled out, despite it being the second longest season, the cracks had already begun to show. You have to understand that this season came out in the aftermath of the movie we just talked about, which meant that the landscape of the franchise had changed to the point where it was almost unrecognizable to many fans. Their favorite characters were dead, and now they were expected to pick up the pieces, become emotionally invested in new characters, and start from scratch, which honestly was maybe asking a little too much. Many fans felt resentment about being pushed to like these new characters after having their favorites simply deleted. Interest for the TV show began to fade for some fans with the start of the third season. The fact that Rodimus was the opposite of Optimus when it came to calm, confidence, experience, and inspirational leadership really didn't help the matter in our eyes. Hasbro and the studios behind the show had swung the pendulum too far in one direction, and that caused fatigue among fans. The fact that they had introduced these new characters partly to sell toys meant that several episodes felt more obviously product-driven, sacrificing some of the emotional familiarity of the earlier seasons. They had even more reason for doing this because despite the film being praised for a lot of things over time, it wasn't a major box office success. The companies had to recover momentum somehow. You can see the effects of the production pressures in several episodes where the quality dips visibly. The show had always used animation studios, including Toei and ACOM, but fan criticism has often singled out some ACOM animated episodes for rougher animation and consistency issues. Amid all of this, Hasbro, realizing that things were headed south, decided to revive Optimus Prime to appease fans and regain some momentum. Friedman later said he had warned that killing Optimus was a mistake because Optimus functioned as a fatherly center for the Autobots. While bringing Optimus back did help repair some fan interest, it created another problem. Now that the Fallen had returned and newer characters were still around, the roster of the Transformers had become absolutely massive. The writers also had to deal with the fact that Rodimus Prime's arc had already been disrupted by Optimus returning. Thus, some of the stories that came out in the aftermath felt convoluted and lackluster. And of course, despite having a loyal fan base, Transformers wasn't the only major toy-driven animated property in town. There were other contemporaries like He-Man, G.I. Joe, and later Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles competing for overlapping audiences. The TV series was already in its final stretch, but what finally closed out the American G1 cartoon would come with the fourth season. Controversial final season, a compressed finale. The fourth and final season of the show proved a lot of what we've just spoken about. The series reached a difficult point, and the short length of the final season highlighted that. Instead of a full season like the ones before, the final American season was essentially a three-part miniseries called The Rebirth. For context, the previous 3 seasons all had double-digit episode counts, even the 3rd season where you could already see the show's decline approaching. The title was ironic because The Rebirth was supposed to launch a new era, but it ended up becoming the American cartoon's finale. In 1987, seeing changing interest in the TV series and the toy line, Hasbro released the new Transformers concepts like Headmasters and Target Masters. You have to understand, the toys were central to the franchise, and the final season was clearly designed to introduce those new ideas into the animated continuity. What resulted was a rushed and compressed finale that had too many things going on while trying to wrap up an epic saga that had been going on for nearly 3 years. In The Rebirth, the brief period of peace following the return of Optimus Prime towards the end of the 3rd season is broken when the Decepticons, led by Galvatron, attack the Autobot base and a fight breaks out once again between the two groups. During the chaos, the Decepticons steal a highly guarded artifact from within the Autobot vault. With the object now in their possession, Galvatron retreats as the villains make their way to Cybertron. Optimus then reveals that the artifact is the key to the Plasma Energy Chamber, a powerful ancient Cybertronian device connected to the early history of the Autobots. I mean, you see the issue here. They essentially drop a massive reveal about Cybertron's ancient past in a very compressed fashion with limited elaboration or setup. Obviously, the Autobots follow the Decepticons to Cybertron, and once again the fighting resumes. During this, they manage to take back the key from the villains, but not before the power surge from the chamber damages their ship and sends them hurtling through space to an unknown planet. The Decepticons follow their adversaries to this new location, but in the meantime, the Autobots come into contact with the natives of this planet called Nebulans. The Nebulans turn out to be a humanoid alien race who have been oppressed by a group of their own species using machines. While they are initially hostile towards the Autobots, they eventually realize the benefits of combining their strengths. This leads them to use a technique called binary bonding to combine themselves with the heads or weapons of the Transformers, creating Headmasters and Target Masters. Of course, the Decepticons managed to combine with the villainous Nebulans as well. We thought it was pretty cool how the Decepticons are essentially forced into the process in a different way, highlighting the contrast between them and the Autobot Headmasters and Target Masters. The fight then once again moves back to Cybertron, where Galvatron uses the key and the Plasma Energy Chamber's power to endanger Earth and the Sun. The final battle then begins, leading our heroes to redirect the energy in a way that restores Cybertron's golden glow. Galvatron and his forces are defeated, and the golden age of Cybertron is seemingly restored. You might think I'm explaining this in a rush, but that's literally why the entire thing feels rushed in the first place. Things move too fast from one point to another, and the next thing you know, the entire American G1 saga is over just like that. Let me remind you that all of these things happen within 3 episodes. Don't even get me started on the pacing issues that all of these developments created. I also feel like nobody really cared about the Nebulans because they weren't properly developed. They felt somewhat out of place in this universe, especially the part where they fuse with the Transformers. Like, where did that come from? The entire franchise was built around alien robots, and now you've got humanoid aliens fusing with them to create new versions of Transformers. The whole thing felt contrived and forced, and, because they were pushing toys, it kinda was. Even if we were to overlook all of these flaws, the final season has one of the most basic flaws in storytelling when trying to conclude a saga on the scale of the original Transformers show. The flaw I'm talking about is that there's no fully satisfying conclusion provided to the audience. Yeah, the Decepticons are defeated and Cybertron is restored, but what happens to the Nebulans and the new characters in the long run? The Decepticons are beaten but not permanently destroyed, yet the revival of Cybertron has a sense of finality to it. It doesn't feel completely earned because the threat is still out there. If they had posed this ending as a cliffhanger, it might have worked, but from what we can see, they meant it to be the definitive ending for the American cartoon, which increases the feeling of it being rushed even more. I mean, were these groups not fighting against each other for millions of years, and now we're supposed to believe that things are just over? Like I've said throughout this video, not once has it been lost on us that these shows were created to promote toys, but this final season really pushed the limits in that regard. The Alien Robot saga, featuring a war that had been going on for eons across numerous worlds, finally ends with the Autobots celebrating as if they've dealt with their enemies once and for all. And I mean, to me, that just sounds ridiculous, and I wasn't alone in feeling that way, as you'll soon find out. Japan refuses the ending. When I said there were others who found The Rebirth unsatisfactory, Japan's Takara and Toei Animation were among the most important examples. You might be wondering how they had the power to refuse the ending, considering the fact that Transformers was Hasbro's property in an American market. To understand this, let me give you a brief background on the relationship that Hasbro shared with Takara. You see, Takara had a major role in the creation of the Transformers toy concept, because many of the original toys came from Takara's Diaclone and Microchange lines. Hasbro imported, rebranded, and unified these toys into a single American toy line, while Marvel and Sunbow helped build the fiction around them. These toys would get new names, character profiles, and story context, becoming the Transformers that you and I are familiar with today. Because Takara remained deeply tied to the Japanese side of the franchise, Japan developed its own continuity. While Japan had followed the American cartoon through the first 3 seasons in the movie, it didn't continue with the Rebirth in the same way. Instead, Takara and Toei created Transformers: The Headmasters, which replaced the Rebirth in Japanese animated continuity and introduced the Headmasters in a very different way. Honestly, we think this was the smarter choice, and Hasbro probably should have done something closer to this as well. Transformers: The Headmasters began in 1987, and it ran for 35 episodes. It picked up after the earlier cartoon continuity, but instead of using the Nebulan binary bonding idea from the Rebirth, it treated the Headmasters differently, presenting them as small Cybertronians who used larger bodies called transtectors. That immediately made the concept feel more naturally connected to the robot mythology. They then followed this up with Transformers: Super God Master Force, which ran for 42 episodes, and later Transformers Victory, which introduced the new Autobot commander, Starsaber. There was also the one-part OVA Transformers Zone in 1990. Now, these stories weren't exactly flawless masterpieces, but at least they weren't rushed and cramped like the Rebirth. Just look at the size of each new show. They were allowed the time and space to be developed more fully. In the end, Japan's rejection of the Rebirth is significant because it created a different Generation 1 animated continuity. For North American fans, the original cartoon ends with the Rebirth, but for the Japanese fans, the story continues through the Headmasters, Master Force, Victory, and Zone. That split altered the legacy of G1 in a major way. What came next? After the end of the Rebirth, things essentially started going cold for Hasbro's original American G1 cartoon as the company moved on due to changing sales and waning interest. As far as the American cartoon continuity is concerned, there was no direct animated sequels immediately following the Rebirth. Meanwhile, the Marvel comics continued beyond the cartoon's ending, running into the early 90s. But those comics had their own lore and character development that was completely different from the animated show. Then, in the early 90s, Hasbro gave the franchise another shot by launching Transformers Generation 2, or G2. This essentially brought back older characters with new packaging, updated toys, and some new designs. The TV series connected to G2 wasn't a brand new animated continuation, it was mostly a rebroadcast of the original G1 cartoon with new CGI intros, transitions, and framing effects added on top. A true revival would finally come in 1996 in the form of Beast Wars Transformers. I absolutely love this series because it felt like a real sequel to the original 1984 show, even though it came out 12 years later and used a completely different visual style. The series followed the clash between the Maximals and Predacons, descendants of the Autobots and Decepticons, led by Optimus Primal and Megatron, respectively. We're not going to dive too deep into this show because I really want those of you who haven't watched it to go back and check it out for yourselves, but let me just say that after the original show, this series was responsible for reviving the franchise for a new generation. Yep, it's that good. Then, from the early 2000s, the franchise would get a different continuity spread across shows like Transformers Armada, Energon, and Cybertron, often grouped together by fans as the Unicron Trilogy. This era introduced minicons and brought in a new wave of fans from the 2000s. We obviously also have the Michael Bay films, which brought the franchise to the big screen in a massive way and added to its legacy while also bringing in newer fans. In terms of comic books, IDW Publishing launched a major new Transformers comic continuity in 2005, exploring the franchise in a way that had never been done before. My main point here is that despite the G1 saga ending the way it did in North America, the legacy of the Transformers franchise endured and even flourished in different ways over the years. I think it's safe to say that the legacy of Transformers cannot be questioned. What started out as an attempt to sell toys evolved into a global phenomenon that outgrew the initial intentions of its creators. Despite the rushed way the original Transformers animated TV show ended, it kickstarted a franchise that has withstood the test of time. People always say it's not how you start the journey, but how you end it. However, we believe Transformers is the rare case where the ending of the original cartoon didn't define the franchise forever. The rebirth may have been rushed, but the journey it helped close was only the beginning of something much larger. The franchise continued through Japanese sequels, comics, Beast Wars, reboots, movies, and countless reinventions. I believe that when the story of Transformers finally stops getting told, the end will be beautiful because of the fantastic journey this franchise has enjoyed. And all of it began in 1984 with the Transformers animated TV show. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you know where those like and subscribe buttons are. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next one, but until then, stay safe